Australia's Tactical Fighter Force project to select a replacement for the RAAF's Mirage fighter was a significant one, not only for choosing the RAAF's main fighter for the next 3 decades, but to develop local industry participation. The search for a Mirage replacement began as early as 1970, and by November 1979, the shortlist had been reduced to 2 aircraft, the General Dynamics F-16 and McDonnell Douglas F-18. By late 1981, it was the FA-18 Hornet that was chosen. Northrop had partnered with McDonnell Douglas to create a derivative of the YF-17 for the United States Navy, which became the FA-18 Hornet multi-role combat aircraft. The first prototypes flew on 18th of November 1978, and full-scale production for the US Navy was approved in June 1981. In November 1981, the Australian government contracted to buy 75 Hornets, 57 single-seaters, and 18 twin-seat variants. This would be the RAAF's first computerized digital aircraft with innovations that made a more versatile, survivable, maintainable, and reliable aircraft than previous generation fighter bombers. The Hornet's advanced glass cockpit, with extensive use of software, programmable displays and systems, complemented by the HOTAS, or hands-on throttle and stick, capability, allowed a single pilot to cope with the workload of both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions that would otherwise have required a second crew member. The FA-18A was also more self-sufficient with an onboard auxiliary power unit, which enabled engine self-start and power for basic ground maintenance or operation of the avionics, as well as a comprehensive test and fault analysis system on board. The Hornet was refuelable in flight and equipped with an internal 20mm cannon, as well as 9 external carriage points for auxiliary fuel, sensors, and air or surface target weapons. Design engineers had made the Hornet incredibly safe in terms of system redundancy and failure-tolerant digital systems, including a quadruple redundant digital fly-by-wire flight control system and a mechanical backup linkage to the stabilators. The twin engines provided redundant electrical systems. There were 2 independent, separately routed hydraulic systems, multiple avionics multiplex buses, and redundant avionics mission computers. The airframe made extensive use of graphite composite materials, providing lightweight, high strength and fatigue, and corrosion resistance. A significant aspect of the Australian Hornet program was local participation in the assembly of the aircraft. The first 2 aircraft were assembled in the US, but the remaining 73 were assembled by government aircraft factories in Victoria, who were the prime contractor. They were responsible for components, final assembly, and flight testing. The Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation were involved in assembly, engine testing, and some airframe parts. Other Australian companies were involved with the radar and avionics used in the Hornet. The first 2 RAAF Hornets were then ferried to Australia in a non-stop record-breaking trans-Pacific flight on May 17, 1985, from US Naval Air Station Lemoore, California, to RAAF Williamtown, a 15-hour flight. The first operational Hornet unit was No. 3 Squadron, reformed at Williamtown on March 31, 1986. Then, No. 77 Squadron at Williamtown started converting to Hornets by mid-1987. No. 75 Squadron was also undergoing Hornet conversion and relinquished its Mirages in September 1988. The last RAAF Hornet was handed over on May 12, 1990, and delivered by Aircraft Research and Development Unit Test Pilot Squadron Leader Ron Hack to Williamtown on May 14th. 2 days later, the officer commanding No. 81 Wing, Group Captain Ray Conroy, displayed this aircraft at RAAF Fairbairn for its official handover, 5 years after the first aircraft had been delivered across the Pacific. In 1991, the ANAAS-38 Nighthawk targeting pod became the first new system fitted to the RAAF's Hornets. This pod enabled the pilot to navigate and acquire targets at night using a forward-looking infrared passive sensor shown on a cockpit digital display. A target could then be illuminated by a laser target designator for the guidance of laser-guided munitions. During the 1990s, the threat of MiG-29s operating in the region urged the RAAF to consider replacing the Hornet with the Eurofighter Typhoon or the Super Hornet. However, the decision was made to substantially upgrade the existing Hornets. This upgrade program began in 1999. Phase 1 of the program replaced the Hornet's computer and navigation systems and radio, as well as enabling the aircraft to operate the AIM-120, replacing the AIM-7M Sparrow. Phase 2 replaced the APG-65 radar with the AN-APG-73, and a secure voice encryption communication system was added, along with computer system upgrades. Integration of the AIM-132 ASRAM was enabled, replacing the AIM-9 Sidewinder as the within-visual range air-to-air missile. The Hornets were then fitted with a joint helmet-mounted queuing system, Link 16 networked multifunction information distribution system, a new countermeasure dispensing system, and several upgrades to their cockpit displays. The whole fleet was upgraded by late 2006. Further upgrades were made over the following 6 years, including improved electronic countermeasure system, improved radar, targeting pods, GPS protection system, and data link capabilities. The upgrade program also addressed any airframe damage. The Hornet's airframe had a safe life of 6,000 hours under specified flight profiles, and each aircraft was assessed and repaired to restore airframe integrity. The whole upgrade process was long and complicated, resulting in a diversity of aircraft in various stages of modification. RAAF Hornets from Air Combat Group had maintained a presence for the 5-power integrated air defense system at Butterworth, Malaysia and Singapore, with deployments several times a year, as well as operating in the Philippines, Thailand and the US. During late 1999, No. 75 Squadron was placed on alert to provide close air support and air defense for the international forces deployed to East Timor as part of the International Force East Timor. While Indonesian forces posed a potential threat, no fighting eventuated, and the Hornets were not required. Following the 11 September 2001 terrorist attacks in America, the Australian government agreed to deploy FA-18s to protect the major USAF airbase on the Indian Ocean island of Diego Garcia, which was being used to mount operations in Afghanistan. This would be known as Operation Slipper from November 2001 to May 2002. 4 77 Squadron Hornets were initially deployed to the island and were relieved by 3 squadron pilots and ground crew in early February 2002. There were no threats during the deployment, and the operation was uneventful. No. 75 Squadron formed part of the Australian contribution to Operation Bastille and Operation Falconer in the Middle East during the 2003 invasion of Iraq. The Australian Hornets saw combat in several roles during the Iraq War. 75 Squadron was initially used to escort high-value coalition aircraft, such as tankers and airborne early warning and control aircraft. It rapidly became clear that the Iraqi Air Force posed no threat, so from March 21st, the squadron also began conducting air interdiction sorties against Iraqi forces. On March 21st, one of the Hornets dropped a Mark 82 GBU-12, the first bomb dropped by the RAAF in combat since the Vietnam War, and the first dropped by an Australian fighter aircraft since the Korean War. The Australian commanders in the Middle East had 75 Squadron assigned to support the US Marine Corps' 1st Marine Expeditionary Force, flying up to 12 sorties a day of close air support. Sortie intensity decreased as the American forces closed in on Baghdad, and relatively few targets remained in southern Iraq. On April 12th, 75 Squadron supported elements of the Special Air Service Regiment and 4th Battalion Royal Australian Regiment, which occupied Al Asad Air Base. On this day, 5 RAAF FA-18As flew close air support profiles in direct support of the Australian Army's Special Air Service Regiment for the first time since the Vietnam War. No. 75 Squadron conducted its final sorties on April 27, 2003. During the Iraq conflict, the squadron flew 350 combat missions, including 670 individual sorties, and dropped 122 laser-guided bombs. The 14 Hornets returned safely to Australia on May 14, 2003. Hornets engaged in combat missions as part of the Air Task Group for Operation Okra between March 15, 2015 and May 12, 2017. The Okra Air Task Group was part of the Australian Defence Force's contribution to the international effort to disrupt and degrade the Daesh terrorist threat in Iraq. In late August 2015, a bunker raid on a senior IS figure was conducted, and the first classic Hornet CAS missions also occurred during 75 Squadron's rotation. Missions over Syria began in September 2015, with the first weapon drops occurring a few days later. 75 Squadron handed over to 77 Squadron later in September. In late December 2015, 4 classic Hornets took part in the largest coalition airstrikes against Islamic State when 21 coalition aircraft destroyed 137 targets in eastern Syria. 75-77, and 3 squadrons continued to rotate in what became a 26-month deployment for 81 Wing. The squadrons collectively flew over 14,000 hours on combat missions and delivered more than 1,500 precision munitions. The RAAF's FA-18B Classic Hornet fleet has achieved the distinction of being the safest jet fighter in the Australian Air Force's service, with just 4 airframes lost in over 405,000 flying hours. 3 Squadron ended Classic Hornet operations in late 2017, while 77 Squadron ceased Hornet operations in December 2020, and 75 Squadron was the last RAAF unit to operate the FA-18A, which made its final flight on 4th of December 2021,